He let his mom control everything, even my pregnancy. Now she wants access to my baby. When I first found out I was pregnant, I thought it would be one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, it marked the beginning of months filled with stress, arguments, and tears. I'm 8 months along now, and instead of feeling excited about holding my baby soon, I feel trapped in constant battles, not only with my husband, but with his mother, who seems determined to control everything about my pregnancy and my life. My husband and I had been together for a few years before the positive test. And although our relationship wasn't perfect, I believed we had a strong enough foundation to bring a child into the world. But the moment I told him I was expecting, something inside him changed. He started acting in ways I'd never seen before, blocking the doorway during fights so I couldn't leave the room, raising his voice, sometimes coming home drunk and swearing at me. The man who used to be my partner suddenly felt like someone I had to defend myself from. And then there was his mother. From the very beginning, she made herself a central figure in this pregnancy. She wanted to be involved in every decision, big or small, and whenever I expressed boundaries, she would brush them aside like they were childish complaints. I told her once that I needed space during arguments with my husband, especially when he physically stopped me from leaving a room, which made me feel trapped and unsafe. Her response? He just wants to work things out right then and there. It's not like you've been kidnapped. I remember standing there, stunned, realizing that she didn't take my feelings seriously at all. What hurt even more was that she made me feel like everything was my fault. She would say things like, "You're just too emotional, you're overreacting. You should be grateful he wants to sort things out instead of running away." I tried to explain to her that this wasn't just about an argument, that what her son was doing could be considered false imprisonment. She laughed at me and said I was being dramatic. But the worst part? Instead of supporting me, my husband just sat there silently, never standing up for me. I was pregnant, scared, and exhausted. Yet the two people who should have been protecting me were the ones making me feel smaller and weaker every day. Things only got worse as the pregnancy progressed. I was already dealing with morning sickness, fatigue, and the emotional roller coaster that comes with carrying a child, but instead of support, I felt like I was constantly defending myself. My husband's attitude became unpredictable. Some days he was calm, even affectionate, but other days he would snap at me over the smallest things. I started to dread evenings, unsure of what version of him would walk through the door. And his mother? She seemed to feed off the tension. One afternoon, during a family gathering, she brought up, right in front of everyone, the idea that she should be in the delivery room when I gave birth. I froze. I had already made it clear to my husband that I only wanted him there with me. Childbirth is an incredibly vulnerable, intimate moment, and I couldn't imagine having someone who constantly disrespected me watching me go through it. But instead of shutting the idea down, my husband awkwardly agreed with her in front of everyone, saying, "It's not about you, it's about the baby." My heart dropped. Not about me. I was the one carrying this child, the one whose body was being pushed to its limits, the one whose life would literally be on the line in that delivery room. And yet in that moment, it felt like my voice, my comfort, and my boundaries meant absolutely nothing. That I confronted him later, asking why he would side with her knowing how I felt. He shrugged, saying I was overreacting and that his mom just wanted to be a part of the experience. But to me, it wasn't about sharing an experience. It was about respect. And respect was something I was losing fast, both from him and from her. From then on, I started noticing that his mother always had a way of twisting situations to make me look like the villain. If I didn't want to attend one of her dinners, I was selfish. If I asked for space, I was too sensitive. She once told me directly, "You're lucky you even have him. Don't ruin it with your drama." It wasn't just toxic, it was suffocating. By the time I hit the third trimester, I was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. My back ached constantly, my ankles were swollen, and sleep was a distant memory. All I wanted was peace, but instead, I felt like I was living in the middle of a tug-of-war. My husband had begun spending more and more time at his mother's house. At first, he'd say it was just to check in or help her out, but those visits stretched longer and longer. There were nights when I was home alone, trying to calm the baby kicking inside me, while he was sitting comfortably at his mom's kitchen table. I kept telling myself it was just him being a good son, but in reality, it felt like abandonment. What hurt even more was how his mother enabled all of this. She downplayed every red flag, dismissing his behavior as if it was nothing. When I confided in her once, stupidly hoping she might encourage him to support me more, she brushed it off with a smirk. He just wants to sort things out in the moment. Don't act like you're some prisoner. It's not that serious. I felt my blood boil. Not that serious? When he blocked doorways during arguments so I couldn't walk away. When he cornered me so I'd have no choice but to keep listening. When he raised his voice and called me names. How is that not serious? It wasn't just about being emotional or pregnant hormones. It was about respect and safety. And every time she excused him, it felt like she was chiseling away at my reality, making me question if maybe I was the problem. But the worst blow came when she started involving herself in our finances. Out of nowhere, she began insisting that I owed her money. Her reasoning? Years ago, when my husband and I bought our house, I contributed half of the deposit from my own savings. His mother had given him the other half as a gift. At least, that's what she called it then. Now, suddenly, she was rewriting history, claiming it was a loan, and that I was responsible for paying it back too. That I couldn't believe it. Not only was I battling disrespect in my own marriage, but now she was trying to create financial chains around me as if I was indebted to her. When I pushed back, calmly explaining the math and the fact that her money only covered his half of the deposit, she mocked me. She laughed in my face, calling me a businesswoman with my intellectual nonsense. In that moment, I realized she didn't just dislike me. She wanted to undermine me completely. And what did my husband do? He sat there silently, watching me be humiliated by his mother, and said nothing. That silence cut deeper than any insult she could ever throw. After that humiliating fight with my mother-in-law, I went home and cried until my chest hurt. The baby kicked inside me the whole time, as if sensing the stress I was under. I told myself over and over, this isn't good for me. This isn't good for the baby. But no matter how hard I tried to block it out, the words of his mother replayed in my head like a broken record. The next few days were tense. My husband avoided talking about what had happened. If I brought it up, he would shrug, mumble something about not wanting to argue, and then change the subject. I was stunned. He had sat there and watched me be disrespected, mocked, even, and his response was to avoid the conversation. That I started noticing a disturbing pattern. Whenever his mother attacked me, he downplayed it. If she belittled me, he'd say, "That's just how she is." If she twisted facts, he'd mutter, "She didn't mean it that way." It was always excuses. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized he had been conditioned since childhood to protect her at any cost, even when she was wrong. But what about protecting me? His wife, the mother of his child? The tension between us grew thicker each day. Small things turned into arguments. When I complained about him being gone at his mom's house again, he accused me of being too controlling. When I asked him to back me up in front of her, he claimed I was too sensitive. I started feeling like maybe I was losing my mind. Because every time I tried to stand up for myself, I was told I was overreacting. And then came the breaking point. One evening. After an exhausting day, his mother barged into our apartment without warning. She waved around a folder of papers and started ranting about the money I owed her. She wasn't calm. She was shouting, her voice sharp and cutting. She called me selfish, accused me of trying to steal her son away, and demanded that when the baby was born, she would have the right to be there from the very first moment. That I was stunned. My hands shook. The stress was so intense that I felt my stomach tighten painfully, and for a moment, I feared something was wrong with the baby. I begged her to leave, but she refused, saying this was her family's home as much as mine. And my husband? He just stood there, frozen, torn between us. He didn't defend me. He didn't ask her to leave. He just muttered that we should all calm down. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent promise to myself. I was not going to let this woman ruin the first months of my baby's life. If my husband couldn't protect me and set boundaries, I would do it myself. The days following that confrontation were some of the loneliest I'd ever experienced. I was 8 months pregnant, my body was heavy, my emotions raw. And yet instead of feeling supported, I felt like I was trapped between two forces, my overbearing mother-in-law and my passive husband. That I began keeping a notebook, writing down every incident that happened with her. It wasn't just for my own sanity, but also because I realized I needed to have a record. Every insult, Every time she stormed into our apartment uninvited, every moment she dismissed my feelings, I documented it. It sounds dramatic, but in those pages I could finally see what I had been living through, a pattern of control, manipulation, and emotional abuse. Point one entry still makes my blood boil when I read it back. Emile told me that once the baby is born, she'll be taking the baby to her house every weekend, whether I like it or not, because she deserves bonding time too. I remember staring at her in disbelief when she said that, my hands instinctively clutching my belly. I told her firmly, "No, that's not happening. The baby will stay with me." Her response? She laughed in my face and said, "We'll see about that." Meanwhile, my husband brushed it off like it was nothing. "She doesn't mean it literally," he said. "She just wants to be involved." But to me, those weren't harmless words. They were threats that I started imagining what life would be like after the baby came. Sleepless nights, postpartum recovery, trying to breastfeed, and on top of all that, having her hovering over me, criticizing everything I did, claiming rights over my newborn. The thought alone gave me panic attacks. I made a decision. For the first time, it wasn't about keeping the peace or about avoiding conflict. It wasn't even about my marriage. It was about my baby. I sat my husband down at the kitchen table one evening. My voice was shaking, but I was firm. "From now on," I told him, "your mother is not welcome here. She will not be in the delivery room. She will not be holding the baby until I decide it's safe. And if she wants to see our child at all, it will be on my terms, when I'm ready. If you can't respect that, then I will raise this baby without her, and without you if I have to." His eyes widened. For once, he didn't have a quick excuse or a half-hearted dismissal. He just sat there, stunned into silence. That night, I lay in bed with one hand resting on my belly, feeling the tiny kicks of the life inside me. I whispered softly, "Don't worry, little one. Mama's got you. I'll protect you no matter what." It was the first time in weeks that I felt something close to peace. Because even if I was standing alone in this battle, I finally knew exactly where I stood. As the due date crept closer, the tension in our home thickened like fog. My belly was heavy, my feet swollen, and my patience with both my husband and his mother was wearing thin. Every phone call from her felt like a test of my boundaries. She would call at odd hours, asking intrusive questions. "What's your dilation now? When's your next checkup? Are you eating enough protein? Don't forget, my son was a big baby. You'll need all your strength." It wasn't curiosity. It was control. I could hear it in her tone. One afternoon, she showed up at our apartment without warning. I was lying on the couch, exhausted from another sleepless night, when I heard the knock. My stomach dropped. I didn't even want to open the door, but she kept knocking, louder each time, until it was clear she wasn't leaving. When I finally opened it, she breezed past me like she owned the place. "I just came to check if everything's ready for my grandbaby," she announced, heading straight to the nursery. I followed her, my heart pounding. She looked around, touching the crib, opening drawers, inspecting clothes I had carefully folded. Then she turned to me and said, "This color isn't right. Babies need softer shades. I'll bring some things from my house." That was the moment I snapped. "Stop," I said, louder than I intended. "This is my baby's room. You don't get to come in here and tell me how to do things. You don't get to decide what's best." "I do." She blinked, stunned for a second, then narrowed her eyes. "You're too emotional," she said coldly. "This is why I worry about the baby being only with you. At least with me, things will be stable." Her words cut like knives. When my husband came home later, I told him everything. His response? A sigh, a shake of his head, and the same line he always used. "She didn't mean it that way." I exploded. Stop defending her. She barged into our home, criticized me, and basically said I'm unfit to be a mother. And you just excuse it? Do you realize how that makes me feel? I'm supposed to be preparing to give birth, and instead I'm fighting your mother at every turn. He rubbed his temples, avoiding my eyes. "Look, she's just excited. You're overreacting." That night, I cried myself to sleep. Not just from exhaustion, but from the growing realization that I couldn't rely on him to protect me, or our baby, from her. If anything, he was the bridge she kept walking across to invade our lives. In that moment, I understood something clearly. Once the baby was born, the battle would only intensify. And if my husband wouldn't stand beside me, I would have to stand alone. The day finally came. At 3 a.m., I woke up to sharp cramps that refused to fade. At first, I tried to breathe through them, convincing myself it was another false alarm. But within an hour, the contractions were steady and intense. It was time that I shook my husband awake. "It's happening," I whispered, my voice trembling from both pain and fear. He jolted upright, grabbed the hospital bag, and rushed us to the car. On the way, instead of holding my hand or telling me it would be okay, he called his mother. I couldn't believe it. I was in the passenger seat, clutching my belly, fighting back tears, and he was updating her on every detail. "Yes, Mom. The contractions are 5 minutes apart. Yes, we're heading to the hospital now. Don't worry, I'll keep you posted." I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue. I couldn't waste energy arguing. When we arrived at the hospital, I barely had time to register the bright lights of the maternity ward before I saw her. Standing at the entrance, purse in hand, a triumphant smile plastered on her face. She had beaten us there. "Finally!" she exclaimed, rushing toward me. I was starting to worry. The nurse stepped in, holding up a hand. Only the patient and her chosen support person are allowed past this point. I exhaled with relief. For once, someone was drawing a line for me. But my mother-in-law's face hardened. "I'm the grandmother," she snapped. "Of course I'll be there. This is my grandchild being born." The nurse shook her head calmly. "It doesn't matter. Only the mother decides who's allowed inside." Then she turned to me. "Who do you want with you?" My husband looked at me expectantly, like I would cave. But something inside me solidified. Through the pain, through the sweat dripping down my temples, I found the strength to say, "Just him. Nobody else." My mother-in-law gasped like I'd slapped her. "You're shutting me out? Do you realize how cruel that is? I was there for all my children's births. I deserve to be part of this moment." I clenched my jaw. "This isn't about you," I said. "This is about me and my baby. And I don't need extra stress while I'm in labor." She tried to argue, but the nurse gently but firmly escorted her back to the waiting area. Her angry voice echoed down the hall as they wheeled me into a delivery room. My husband muttered, "You didn't have to embarrass her like that." I turned my head toward him, glaring through the contraction. "If you can't stand up for me right now, then at least stay quiet. I need to focus." It was the first time I had spoken to him with such finality. And in that moment, I knew, whether he supported me or not, I was ready to defend myself and my baby, no matter what it took. The labor dragged on for hours. Time seemed to blur between the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, the voices of nurses, and the sharp waves of pain that crashed over me again and again. My husband tried to help at first. He held my hand, fetched iced chips, murmured words of encouragement. But I could see the tension on his face, the guilt he carried for his mother sitting outside in the waiting room. Every time his phone buzzed, he'd glance at it, hesitate, and then put it down. I knew who it was. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor announced it was time to push. My heart pounded. This was it. The moment my whole life was about to change. The pain was unbearable, yet somehow, through sheer willpower, I bore down with every ounce of strength I had. Nurses coached me, my husband held my arm steady, and I screamed until my throat was raw. And then, silence, followed by the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, a newborn cry. The nurse placed the tiny, squirming bundle on my chest. My baby, warm, fragile, perfect. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I whispered, "I've got you. You're safe now." It should have been the most peaceful moment of my life. But then I heard raised voices outside the door. Through the muffled walls, I could make out my mother-in-law arguing with the nurses. "I have a right to see my grandchild. This is ridiculous. She's just being spiteful." The baby stirred at the noise, whimpering softly, and my protective instincts surged. I clutched the tiny body closer. "Don't let her in," I told the nurse firmly. A few minutes later, my husband slipped out to speak with his mother. I could hear their voices, her pleading, then snapping, him trying weakly to calm her down. "She says I can't even look at the baby through the window?" His mother shrieked. "I raised you better than this. You're letting her control everything." For a moment, I worried he would cave. But when he returned, his expression was tight, almost ashamed. "I told her she has to respect your wishes," he muttered. I wanted to believe he meant it. But I could see the storm brewing in his eyes. Later, when the baby was cleaned and swaddled, a nurse wheeled us into recovery. As we passed the waiting area, my mother-in-law stood up, tears streaking her face, fury burning in her gaze. She didn't look at me. She looked directly at my newborn, then at my husband, and said in a cold, trembling voice, "This isn't over. You can't keep me away from my own grandchild." The words sent a chill down my spine. In that moment, I realized the battle had only just begun. The first days at home with the baby were a blur of sleepless nights, feedings every 2 hours, and emotions so raw they felt like they would swallow me whole. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, but also filled with a deep, protective love I never knew was possible. But there was no peace. Not really. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my mother-in-law. At first, they were disguised as concern. "How's the baby? Send me a picture. You're not eating enough, are you? New mothers need help. I should come over." When I didn't respond immediately, the messages shifted in tone. "You're being selfish. That's my grandchild, not just yours. Do you think you can keep me away forever? You'll regret this." It wasn't just texts. She started calling my husband late at night, crying hysterically, saying things like, "She's poisoning you against me, and don't let her steal your family from you." I could hear every word through the thin walls. Even though he took the calls in the kitchen, instead of defending me, he grew quieter, more withdrawn. I could see the weight of her manipulation crushing him. Some nights, he wouldn't even come to bed until after midnight, because he was too busy trying to calm her down. The tension seeped into our own relationship. I was recovering from childbirth, my body sore and weak, barely holding it together. And yet he expected me to be understanding of his mother's feelings. One evening, after a particularly long day of feedings and no naps, I found him in the living room scrolling on his phone. I asked him to help with the baby. He sighed, put his phone down, and said, "Mom just wants to see her grandchild. Is that really too much to ask?" I snapped. "Too much to ask? After she's belittled me, screamed at me, accused me of stealing from her? After she tried to force her way into the delivery room? No, she doesn't get to come in here and play grandma when she's treated me like dirt." His jaw tightened. He muttered something about me being too emotional and stormed out of the room. I sat there in the rocking chair, clutching my baby, tears streaming down my face. I was giving everything I had to keep this tiny human safe and loved, and somehow I was still being painted as the villain. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. I froze. When I peeked through the blinds, my stomach dropped. It was her, standing on my porch, holding a bag of baby clothes and toys, as if nothing had happened that I didn't open the door. Instead, I backed away, heart pounding, and whispered to my newborn, "You don't need that kind of chaos. Not now. Not ever." And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my child from someone who didn't respect boundaries, who saw control as love, who would bulldoze anyone in her way. I had to make a choice. And it wasn't going to be easy to ask in a 10 when I didn't open the door that morning. My Emile stood there for nearly 20 minutes, knocking louder each time. At one point, she even tried the handle, as if she had the right to walk in uninvited. My baby stirred in my arms, fussing at the noise, and I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. Eventually, she left, but not before sliding a note under the door. In bold handwriting it read, "You can't keep me from my grandchild. You're not the only mother here." That was the breaking point. When my husband came home from work that evening, I handed him the note. My voice was calm, steadier than I felt inside. "This is harassment. This isn't love. I'm done trying to reason with her." He looked torn. He read the note twice, rubbed his forehead, and muttered, "She doesn't mean it that way." But even he couldn't fully defend her anymore. I took a deep breath and said the words I'd been circling around for weeks. "She doesn't get to see the baby. Not now. Not until she shows she can respect me as the child's mother. If that means no contact, then so be it." The silence that followed felt endless. He stared at me, and I could see the battle in his eyes, loyalty to his mother versus the new family he had chosen to build with me. Finally, he whispered, "Are you sure this is what you want?" I nodded. "It's what our baby needs." That night, I blocked her number on my phone. I told my husband that if he wanted to maintain a relationship with her, that was his choice. But I would not tolerate her toxicity in our home, around me, or around our child. The days that followed were strangely peaceful. No more constant buzzing of my phone. No more screaming matches bleeding through the walls. I focused on my baby, the feedings, the first smiles, the tiny milestones that reminded me what really mattered. But peace came with its own price. My husband grew distant. clearly struggling with the wedge between us and his mother. Some nights, I caught him staring at his phone, debating whether to call her. Other nights, he would ask carefully, "Do you think maybe we could try again? Just a short visit." Each time, my answer was firm. Not until she respects us. Not until she respects me. It wasn't easy. There were tears, arguments, even moments of doubt. But every time I looked at my child sleeping safely in the crib, I knew I had made the right decision. Because being a mother means protecting your child, even if it makes you the villain in someone else's story. And if that means my MIL never sees the baby, then that's the consequence of her own actions. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story that we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.